Wow, thank you. Good afternoon, I guess. I was figuring everyone would be a little tired and run down and done, but no, not so much. So my name is Gerred Dillon, and today I'd like to talk to you about everyone's favorite topic to hate on, and that is hybrid mobile. First, though, before we talk about that, I found something kind of cool that I want to show off. It is, and if you're at my last talk, I've been talking about this all the time, an open beer API. Yeah. So this is begging to be turned into an app. So let's make an app real quick. I'm just going to call it beer app. And I'm going to create a blank starter app with Ionic. Can everyone in the back see my screen okay? Fantastic. All right, we're going to download some stuff from GitHub real quick and get some plugins and whatnot. And I'm going to go ahead and go into this beer app folder. And I'm going to go ahead and start off by adding a platform. Let's add iOS. The Android simulator takes about 10 minutes to start, so we won't do it in this talk. And I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that works. So we're going to go ahead and emulate it on iOS. And I installed iOS 8 last night, so I wasn't expecting that. Sudo. There we go. All right, so that's going to go and do all the acceptance, Xcode build license. All right. That I wasn't expecting. Like the one live code fail that I was not expecting happened. Damn you, iOS 8. OK, so we're back. We're going to go ahead and check that out on our device. And we'll compile some zibs, get that going. Build succeeded, and perfect. We're not on an iPad Air. Let's go back to a 5S. And let that start up, let it boot up, and we should have an app here in a moment. While it's going, wow, iOS 8 really screwed me up. OK, so let's just jump into Ionic Serve. And so let's pull it up in a browser. That's going to give us a couple of things. We're going to have a starter with live reload and a couple other things that allow us to really quickly iterate on this app and start doing actual things with beer with it. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up in a browser. In a text editor. And let's go ahead and do a little sanity check, make sure everything's running, since clearly things are broken today. And we'll just change it to a beer app. OK, perfect. And I don't like how it's kind of gray. I mean, that would be a pretty pungent, gross beer. So let's go ahead and change it to a different color, like a nice orange color, and get that set up and going. So this open beer API, if we were to look at the API, we have beer names, we have ABV, description, brewery. So let's use those a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create what's called an Ion list. And an Ion list, we'll talk about a little bit more, but it helps us with certain things in iOS, like physics-based scrolling, the ability to really feel like a native natural list on iOS. So I'm going to go ahead and create an Ion item, and that's basically a list item. If you've used a UI table view controller before and a table view cell, that's what that is. So let's go ahead and create a card. Card-based UIs are pretty cool. And can everyone in the back see that OK with the solarized? We're good? OK, great. And I'm going to go ahead and create a item, and we're going to make a header for our list, and we're going to make a footer for our list, as well as a description. And you know what? I have Emmet, so I don't know why I'm doing that. Who here has heard of Emmet, even though it's not working at the moment? That's weird. There we go. Who's used Emmet before, or Zen coding? OK, a couple of you. It's a really great HTML shorthand. Be sure to check it out. So if we save that now, we have something that looks somewhat like a card. It's a little weird at the moment. There's nothing filling it. So let's go ahead and put some stuff in there. So what I'm going to do is drop in just a little test, make sure that looks OK. All right, it looks pretty good to me for the moment. Make sure we're closing everything properly. Item header. OK, cool. So let's go ahead and open up our app.js file. And if you're familiar with Angular, what we're going to do next is make a controller. OK, that's looking pretty good. And let's go ahead and just call the API. So we're going to say our scope.beers is an empty array. This is not how you'd end up doing this in production. If you're at my earlier talk today, this should make you pretty aghast with what I'm doing right now. But it gets us up quickly and gets us running. So I'm going to say http.jsonp, and we're going to do it from our Open Beers API. Let me grab that endpoint. And we'll say on success, we'll get some data. And we'll say our scope.beers is equal to our data.beers. Perfect. And nothing changes, but so we don't have an ng repeat in there. Ionic is AngularJS, so we can use whatever directives we want that we expect from Angular. So let's go ahead and say ion item, and we'll do an ng repeat on it of beer in beers. But we still need our ng controller, so let's create that real quick. And we'll just call it main controller. And now we have a list of items going down, a list of nice cards that we can start to fill in. Perfect. Let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the top with the beer name. And from there, I'm going to do the beer description. And in the bottom, I'm going to put the brewery name. And we can see really quickly we have filled out a list of cards with quite a bit of information in it. Now, if I make that smaller like it should be, there we go. Notice that I can click and drag. Physics-based scrolling is enabled. It's working. You don't have to worry about that in the application like you would with a normal Cordova app. And we have a list of items, and it all works as expected. From here, we can start to do things like pull to refresh. We could tap and hold to edit, delete. We'll see some of that later. But we basically have a very simple list-based informational app built in 5 minutes with Ionic Framework. We'll try to emulate. It looks like we're going to have problems with it right now just because of, thanks, iOS 8. Yep. But if I run it on, nope. All right, so that's not going to run for us right now. But that's OK. The rest of our examples will be in the web. So let's talk about what all just happened. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Gerred Dillon. I am the lead services developer and the developer advocate for Ionic Framework. I'm also very interested in all these other things, especially on mobile. WebGL being why I was excited about iOS 8 and installed it. But let's talk a little bit about the history of how we got here and why this is even a topic we're talking about and not something just bygone and well assumed by now. So 2009, something came out called PhoneGap. PhoneGap has since become Cordova, the Apache framework, and PhoneGap's still available through the Adobe, the company that owns the IP for it. And it's interesting to note, AngularJS's beginnings sort of happened around this time as well. So you have two separate things just that started to evolve separately. In 2010, for better or worse, jQuery Mobile came out. And jQuery Mobile, whereas it was strongly suited for making content-based sites, it wasn't really designed as an app framework. It was also a time phones were still slow, not very performant, and really it created a terrible experience that led to a ton of fear, uncertainty, and doubt generated by all these native app developers. Native app developers thought this sucked, and it really did. I mean, it was pretty terrible. Like, does anyone remember, like, around this period of time doing hybrid mobile development? It was bad. So a couple years later, hybrid development, there's a couple people who still care, who are still thinking about this problem. But mostly, it had really taken a dive. 2012 was the Angular 1.0 release. So that was pretty exciting. And a year later, in 2013, Ionic Framework launched its very first version. We're now approaching 1.0. We're working on our release candidates. We're fixing some bugs in our split view controller, a couple other things before we go 1.0. But we're pretty much there. And now we're moving into beyond. We're approaching that day and continuing. So what is Ionic Framework? Ionic Framework is the most advanced hybrid mobile framework, HTML5 hybrid mobile framework out there. built on top of AngularJS, all open source, all free. So the big thing we think about with these mobile apps, these hybrid apps, is the ability to run on multiple devices. And not only the ability to run on multiple devices, but the ability to run on multiple devices well and look good. Right? Ionic Framework supports Android. We're soon to be dropping 2.0 support, 2.x support going only for iOS. And we are working on support for Windows Phone. We have that in beta right now. But we do support everything technically that Cordova supports. There is a brave soul making a BlackBerry app, and he got it out there. So props to him, and good luck to you if you try that. But we are looking at things like Firefox OS, Tizen, supporting the whole range that PhoneGap does support. So what do we care about when we're building these hybrid mobile apps? First and biggest thing, of course, is performance. You don't want laggy scrolling. You want to be able to drag things, have the animations work as you'd expect them to. Jitter, you want to avoid that. You want it to feel like an app, right? You want it to feel good, and that's been the biggest complaint. And Ionic does a lot of heavy lifting around this. And that's really important to think about, because if you were to go and try to build a lot of this stuff yourself, you'd end up with Ionic, right? We built this out of our own frustrations with hybrid mobile development. And so we've gone through the many mistakes of building out physics-based scrollers and all the terrible hell that puts you through in order to do that. And we're really talking about things like ng repeat. ng repeat on mobile, large enough sizes, is a really big issue. It will kill your app. It will crash your app when you're loading that much stuff into memory. So we deal with that with something called collection repeat, which I'll show later. And we've been able to put about 300,000 things on the screen at 30 to 60 FPS. Super impressive stuff. And we do it a lot like how Apple does their table view cells. ng transclude. Who's used ng transclude here? Few of you. OK. If you aren't familiar with ng transclude, basically what that is doing is, with a directive, you can take subcode, like sub markup within a directive, and insert it into your directives code. So doing things like modals, for example, specifying your modals and surrounding it in a modal directive tag. That can be pretty hard on performance. And so it's something you have to think about as you're building out these applications. And everyone's favorite one to hate is scope.watch. Set up enough watchers. You start looking at enough variables on these A processors, and the thing is going to fall over, crash, and die. So think about that as you're building out hybrid mobile apps. What can you do to avoid problems with too many watchers? Things like broadcasting scopes, things like the observer pattern, stuff like that. Then there's the one that really bugs me, and that's uniform UI. So let's go back to this graph here. And there's something different about one of these phones than the other two, and that is hardware buttons. It grinds my gears in a horrible, horrible way when you can always tell someone's done a really terrible hybrid mobile app when on Android they have back buttons at the top. It's like, what are you doing? So what we've done is gone, and this is getting better and better by day, our support for this, but we go through great lengths to make sure that UIs feel native on each platform. And that goes down to having proper stylings for Android, especially in the tab bar view area and the back buttons, and even providing services for maintaining some of this stuff and checking for it. And then native access. Native access we'll talk a lot about today. Cordova has plugins, of course, but those plugins don't necessarily naturally just interface with Angular. So we went ahead and wrote a library called ng-Cordova. And what ng-Cordova is Angular bindings to about 50 Cordova plugins. Everything from AdMob all the way down to your vibration API and everything in between. And I'd like to show you real quickly how easy that is to integrate. So I'm going to go ahead and create, you know what, let's not create a new app. Let's show you some code, and then I'll show you an app I put on my phone before the disaster struck. So here we have just a flashlight example app. Quick and easy enough to live code. But all we've done is included this ng Cordova binary. And what you do is you say in here, Ionic or Cordova plugin add. And I'll make that bigger. So Cordova plugin add, and then a GitHub repo. These GitHub repos are just available on ngcordova.com. So if we were going to go to Flashlight, we would just grab this snippet here. Let's make that a lot bigger. So I would just grab that snippet, and I could copy paste it in. Bam, I have the Flashlight plugin. From there, it's just getting your build of ng Cordova. From that site, putting it in your www.js folder, ng Cordova.js, including it as a script tag. And as an Angular module, it's ready to go. So I built out this quick app because Reflector wasn't working over the network. That all it is this very simple Ionic app. I know it's hard to see. That you press the button, flashlight turns on, flashlight turns off. So really easy native access done in 6 lines of code. And that sort of access is available with many more APIs, camera, vibration. You can run the full gamut of what's available on ng Cordova. And the point is to make it easy, natural, and much more accessible, even if you were to do it in iOS and Objective-C and dealing with that block syntax. Or even Swift. So let's go ahead and look at an example of an Ionic app. And we'll break down the structure. So we're going to go through the same steps again, and we'll kind of talk along the way of what exactly is happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Ionic start, and here's where I just type in an app name. That can be whatever you want, call your project, whatever, don't care. Camel case, snake case, dash case, whatever. From there, you get an option of a couple different preset, I guess, templates, you could say, for you to build off of. One of those is blank. One of those is side menu. So we have a side menu widget, and we'll just go ahead and create that so I can show you. And we're getting everything available for us. One thing I want to notice and point out this time is we fetched some plugins out of the box for you. And one of those is a keyboard plugin. One of the most terrible things is when you start up a Cordova app and you add some form elements and you go to type in the form, and it's a stupid web keyboard with the little top bar, and it just looks ugly and nasty. So we worked to create a native keyboard plugin for all devices that basically will hijack the input, replace it with a native keyboard so that it looks and feels natural. It looks like a native app. So I'm just going to head on into, what do we call that app name? I'm going to type Ionic serve, kill the old one, and then Ionic serve. What this is doing is starting up a static server and a live reload server. If you were just in the Gulp talk, he was explaining what live reload was, but effectively I can make those changes live like I was showing you before and get really quick feedback on my app. So here in this is our side menu. You can drag it out. You can attach it to a button with a delegate. And really quickly, you have a fast bootstrap side menu-based application that you can start working off of. We also do that with tabs. And I want to talk a little bit more about the tabs example because it introduces us to something. And we'll go ahead and hit Ionic start. We've now created 3 applications all at once, right? Like, to do this in iOS, even just to test and play around and prototype would have taken ages. It would have been ugly and taken forever. So I'm going to go to Tabs app, and I'm going to go Ionic serve. All right. So here's our Tabs application. Who here has used UI Router before? Okay, quite a few. If you haven't, or if you were there for my previous talk, UI Router is effectively a state manager for your application that lets you build out really complicated routing trees for your Angular app and still make it look relatively nice and easy to work with. So one very important thing, a very important distinction in an Angular app or in a hybrid mobile app, is the ability to maintain nested levels of state. And we'll look at UI router in a minute, but I just want to show off the example here of, here I have a to-dos based application. It's the same to-dos app, same starter application. And if I tap on one of these, I go into a detail view, right? We have that navigational hierarchy present in most mobile apps. And it's super important for us that, let's say I jump tabs. I go somewhere else in the application. I'm doing something else. It's really important in one of these sorts of applications that you jump back right to where you left off. And so what we did is we extended UI router to be able to do that, because trying to just build that sort of routing system is pretty painful to do. So with this, we're looking at alternatives, basically creating a simple routing API going into Ionic 1.1 and 1.2. But for now, UI router does most of what we want it to do to produce pretty awesome, really quick navigational-based apps. So let's look at the code for that. And if you haven't seen the structure of a Cordova app before I start diving into files, let's see if I can make that bigger. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so you have, I'll just read them out. So you have a couple directories. You have hooks, plugins, SaaS, and the www folder. When you go and add a platform, you'll have a few more platforms specific to the platforms you've added. So SaaS is not used by the Cordova app. Ionic uses SaaS for customization. We have entire articles on our knowledge base and our Learn site, really great ones about how to customize theme and make your Ionic app look great and more towards your design. The www folder is really what we want and contains all of the meat of our application that we're going to end up serving. So if we come in here to our app, you get a whole bunch of base stuff in run and config that sets you up with everything you need to create the basic states for a tab-based application. And you can go from there. They are less contrived examples because it's easy for us to, it would be very easy for us to make a template that's like a contrived, silly example of a tabs app, hand it to you and call it a day. They're less that than frameworks that you can work off of to start to learn and start to feel comfortable. And once you feel comfortable with the tabs app, I typically just go and start a blank app because I know what I want and I structure it how I want it to. I use Browserify. I have my own setup. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, you get to still use what your tools you're used to and still work within the system. So let's look at another example. Ionic supports Hammer.js gestures. Has anyone used Hammer here before? Okay, a couple. Hammer.js is a great library for adding gesture support, touch gesture support to your applications. And really advanced gesture support. Tap and hold is supported. When you swipe, you even get things like velocity. We're working on an animation library right now. And when you do an animation, if I were to open up that slide menu app again, and let's do that. It's very important when you go to drag that the velocity you have matches the animation velocity. For a smooth animation and a great experience, that is essential. Otherwise, you're going to get very choppy, heavy animations. And the animation library we use and the touch library we use support that to give nice, really smooth animations. We're working on our animations v2 library right now. It's open source called Collide. That will give us more capabilities in that realm for you to build even better mobile apps. We want to give you the famous experience in pure Ionic, pure Angular, pure web. So let's open up another example with that. So here, we just have a simple modal view. And what we're doing is in a directive, we'll bring the code over here. I like to use Plunker for a lot of this stuff because these are very digestible examples. Our Learn site uses an internal version that you can just pull up examples on. But all these plunkers will be made available after the talk, so you can go in, play, experiment, and learn about what's going on in each of these examples. So if we look at what's going on within a card, and we go into the card itself, we have an ng-click on the modal for open modal. And if I tap and hold, you can't see that I'm holding, but I am holding, or tapping. That will go ahead and just open that up for us, and we have a modal that opens. Let's go to another example. And this is from the Learn site. This is the formula I wrote that does that exact same thing. So I'm going to tap and hold on the do laundry, and we have an action sheet that pops up. And the way that ends up working out is through a directive called onTapHold, available, or on hold. That's just a directive you can put onto any element anywhere within the entire Angular system. You have things like on swipe left, on swipe right, on pull up, on pull down. All sorts of these directives are made available. And then we also give you a custom handle into the Ionic gesture system, so you can write your own gestures when you feel you need to break out of that mold. One more thing I want to show you all before we do a couple more things and then go to Q&A is collection repeat. So we've seen Ionic list, we've seen Ion item, and we've seen how to make a list. But that's not going to scale large over time. So what we've done is created what's called collection repeat. And I opened this example from our documentation just because the example I have on my Air won't open. It's just too big. It's 100,000 items, and Chrome crashes because of the data. But what we have is a scrollable list, a very quickly scrollable list of 3,000 contacts inside of CodePen. And the way this works is you have to follow a few rules for collection repeat to work. You have to know the height of your table cell. So we're working on a way for dynamic heights to be supported, but we're not just quite there yet. There's a lot of problems in that area that need to be solved. But what will end up happening is as you scroll, a virtual DOM is being created, and elements are being shifted around rather than just adding and removing things to the DOM. And that makes it makes the collection repeat fairly cheap compared to trying to render 3,000 items on screen all at once. And so we're taking an approach fairly close to how React works, minus the DOM diffing, in order to make that happen. We try to make as few DOM operations as possible while enabling the scroll. And things that you're expecting, if I can get to it, there we go. Things that you expect, like filtering, works like that, because you're still working off of that data source. Let's see where we're at. And again, like I said, we are entirely open source. Everything we do is based on web standards. So of course, we're looking into web components. Our grid system, we're using CSS Flexbox. No more nightmares trying to center things horizontally and vertically. And it ships with its own full grid system that you can work with that. So you might be asking, okay, great, Gerred, that's nice. How do I get onto this? How do I start using it? Is it going to be a nightmare once I do npm install Ionic? And what we've done is back in March, we released Ionic Learn. And it's a full site with screencasts, videos, formulas on how to do everything from my first Ionic app all the way up to doing really advanced stuff as far as centralizing data, making calls out, using NG Cordova, working with our navigation system. Far more depth than we can go into in 40 minutes of time today. Let's see. And I think, so yeah, of course, using it, ionicframework.com. And I'll show you how to install it real quick. It's pretty easy. learn.ionicframework.com for Ionic Learn. When you want to start using those NG Cordova plugins, NG Cordova. And then our IRC channel is really, really active. We've gone from 9 people in there to 100 plus in the past 4 months. So a lot of activity. You'll find help at any point in the time during the day and night there. So really quickly before we wrap up and go to questions, installing Ionic, I realized I skipped that at the very beginning. It's as simple as npm install, so you need node and npm, -g, Ionic Cordova. So Ionic is our binary, Cordova is the Cordova binary. And if you're working with iOS Sim, you'll need iOS Sim and iOS Deploy. iOS Sim goes to the simulator, Deploy goes to your device. And you do that, and you're up and running. And once you're doing this, make sure you reinstall this about once a week because we are releasing candidates so fast as we approach 1.0. So with that, I won't keep you for too long. My name is Gerred Dillon. My site's there. All code examples here, if they're not up on Plunkers that I'll release, will be up on GitHub, as well as the slides for the talk, and I'll give you a copy. And I tweet about this stuff at Justice Fries online. And thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
You mentioned using AngularJS. I don't know if you have to code much for this, but in terms of adding event listener for like on one of your list items, how you add like swipe left.
Sure. Sure. So the question is, with Hammer.js, how would you do something like add something like swipe left to a list item? Hammer.js is built into Ionic. So we have a directive called onSwipeLeft that you could use, and then from there apply a class or do anything else with Angular. Yes, question? That's a great question. So the question was, AngularJS is moving quickly itself. What's our plans for staying up with Angular, or are we going to place a mark in the sand and sort of pick a version and go with it? We work very closely with the Google and Angular team. And so we generally try to keep pretty up to date with them within a point release. And it does take some resources to do that. But we participate pretty actively in the design and implementation of Angular. So we're generally in sync with them, and we plan to keep in sync as much as we can, even with Angular 2.0 once that releases. Yes? Great question. Question is there feature parity between the Mac and Windows command line tools? With the exception of the iOS platform, yes. And the Windows Phone 8 platform for the other side, yes. Exact same node binary. Yes. That's a good question. How is Ionic funded? We started a product called Codica back a few years ago. It was a jQuery mobile site builder. And so we've progressed now into Ionic. We are a funded company now, and we're working on back-end services to sort of tie together an Ionic ecosystem together. So Ionic itself will always be free, open source, MIT licensed. It'll be things like cloud build, deploy, A/B testing, analytics that will start to complete that ecosystem within Ionic and Angular. Yes, yes. Question is, do I know of any well-known and popular App Store apps built with Ionic? There's a couple. We have a showcase of quite a few. Chef Steps is up there. They're a Seattle-based company doing culinary classes. Keystone Logistics is up there. They're doing some really awesome stuff with attempting to be effectively the Uber of trucking companies, where you can pick up loads and whatnot and put them up there. So that's gaining a lot of traction. And then Wrangle.io, who is here, has actually just put a bunch of apps that look like they'll do pretty well up on the App Store. Our showcase is growing pretty rapidly, but I'm not sure if any of them have hit the front page yet. I'd have to look. Yes? So what shouldn't I use Ionic for? Yeah, yeah, great question. So what shouldn't you use Ionic for? Ionic, it's of course Angular. So if you're going to do apps that are very heavy, performance driven, like a lot of accelerometer matching, a lot of data crunching, Angular is going to give you a pretty nasty overhead unless you start writing Cordova plugins around it. Also, if you're doing simple content sites, it's great to just put it in there, but your needs may be limited. So one thing you can do with that is not bring in the Angular framework, but if you still like the CSS, you can just still use our CSS. We provide that separately. So you get as much of it as you want, and you may just not need that whole Angular portion of it. Yes? That's a great question. We should talk after this. But the question is, do I know or anyone else knows of anyone using React with this? Not at this time. I've started a separate side project to actually bring Ionic to React. It's going to be a small open source project, but it's in no way affiliated or related at the moment. Yes. Sure. Question is, it's a great question. Can I speak to authentication around Angular and or just Ionic in general? And I'll extend that too to Angular and basically front-end security. The question, of course, I mean, it's hard right now. There's no way to really keep secret tokens in JavaScript, right? It's always going to be somewhat accessible. But if you're doing login like you would on the web by storing sessions and whatnot, and not storing private data, or at least encrypting private data from an outside source, you can do it. You could theoretically create Cordova plugins to sort of offload that work into your native platform, but then you're writing native code around that. So it's the same problems you're going to face with any pure front-end app. Any other questions? Yes? That's a fantastic question. Yes is the answer. So can you easily share code between desktop or web or and Ionic? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The way I've been doing that, because I've been working on a Node WebKit and mobile app, is the majority of my controllers and services and whatnot stay the same. I isolate the specific controllers for Node WebKit and Ionic out and make those their own modules that I use gulp to conditionally include, because I'm using Browserify as well. And from there, the big thing that differs are my templates. So I have conditional loading of templates based on which platform I'm going for. And it mostly works. I've had a few places where I've had to do hacks, and that's mostly like configure steps, but not very much. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming out and spending the end of your day with me.